in a long time, for the first time in a long time, I did not tell her what I was wearing, because this is the first time that we've ever done something together that she is not matching everything that I'm wearing. And that's a good thing, I think. I'm also grateful to have people who I know, who I see on the screen, people who I know that live in Westchester, like Nina Jones, and some people who live in mid-New York, like Cleve Garvey, and I'm pretty sure he's going to let me have it and tease me for the rest of my life for wearing this wonderful crimson and cream outfit, because he is a member of a unique organization called the Divine Nine Kappa Alpha Psi, who just celebrated their founding there a few days ago. I'm grateful for a lot of things. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share in this wonderful gathering as we talk about Martin Luther King Jr. I want to tell you that what I'm about to talk about this evening is based on my own personal understanding of who Dr. King is. I became an understander of Dr. King when I was a student at Morehouse School of Religion somebody's trying to reach me, in Atlanta, Georgia, when I was trying to earn some money as a student there. One of my fraternal brothers knew someone at the King Center who was part of a project called the Martin Luther King National Historic Site. The National Historic Site in Atlanta is called the Martin Luther King National Historic Site, and it encompasses a community that Martin King grew up in called the Sweet Auburn Avenue community. And one of the things that I was told when I was hired was that I had to read. And if anybody knows me, I am a voracious reader. And they gave me about 13 books to read, and I had a month to complete them. I read all 13 books within 7 days. And what I did was I stayed up day and night along with my own studies at school, but I was interested to learn more than what the average citizen understood about Dr. King. Because the average citizen understood who Dr. King was as a preacher. They understood him as a great spokesman, as someone who was a literary giant, somebody who was able to take in information very quickly. But what I wanted to do was to find out about the environment that he grew up in. And the environment that he grew up in is very interesting. And I wish that more people would talk about his childhood and learn about his childhood versus his adult life. Because if you understood the childhood and the environment that Dr. King grew up in, you would have a better understanding of how he became the person that he had become and still is. Dr. King, in his dissertation, you can tell by reading the dissertation, he believed in what we call personalism, that God has a personality, that God is not just someone who we read about in the Old Testament, or as we Christians call the New Testament, but God has a significant personality. And Martin King did not see God as male. Martin saw God as spirit. And that was kind of unique for his time, because Martin King got his dissertation, completed his dissertation in 1955. And 1955 in America played a significant role in the civil rights movement. Martin King believed that to have a relationship with God, one must understand the personality of God from their perspective. Martin King believed in existentialism, that God was not abstract, that God was not this being that had unique idea, that God was some type of nostalgia, but God had a personality. God had this distinct relationship with human beings, and God is concerned about human beings, not just from a spiritual point of view, but God is concerned for humankind from a point of justice, from a point of society, and also, most importantly, from a status of being. And in his dissertation, he said the ultimate reality of who God is found in personality. God has a personality. God cares about the creation. God did more than just create our world in so many days. God was concerned how humankind interacted with each other. And he believed that based on what he saw growing up. Martin King was born on January 15th, 1929. But on the birth certificate, the original birth certificate, it does not read that. Matter of fact, when he changed his name legally in 1957, at the age of 28 years old, the original document had someone crossing out Michael Luther and writing in black ink, Martin Luther Jr. And that's an interesting story by itself. Martin King's father, who was at the time, when Martin was born, he was the associate pastor of a unique church in the area, which was down the block, called the Ebenezer Baptist Church. Martin King's grandfather, Adam Daniel Williams, was from a sharecropping family there in Georgia, and he came to Atlanta because he believed that there was a profound calling in his life. A.D. Williams became the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church around 1895, I believe, 1895. And in 1909, they purchased the house at 501 Auburn Avenue for a price of $3,500 in 1909. That's a unique price for an African American to pay $3,500 for a 3-bedroom house in Auburn Avenue. Auburn Avenue, as I said earlier, was part of what's called the Sweet Auburn Avenue community. By the time Martin King was birthed, there was a lot going on in Atlanta. You had W.E.B. Du Bois. Du Bois and a gentleman who was the president of Tuskegee Institute had this wonderful conversation, not in person, but by pen and paper, by letter, by writing, where W.B. Du Bois believed that it was important for the African American to get an education. He had an idea that if you had schools in poor neighborhoods, you could develop the neighborhood based on academics. And if you ever take a chance to look at African American universities, they are found in not well-off communities. Atlanta University, Morehouse College, Spelman, Clark University, Morris Brown College are in communities that are considered not poor, but not wealthy. They are at the cusp of trying to develop. Martin King grew up in an environment where some brilliant people were coming up. John Hope, who at the time was the president of Morehouse College. Down the street, you had a wonderful man by the name of William Howard Borders, who was the pastor of the Wheat Street Baptist Church. Also, you had the Odds Fellows, who were a group of men who got together, who believed in the development of the African, that by finance, by education, you could develop a group of people who had just been freed from slavery. Also, you had a guy by the name of Mr. Herndon, Alex Herndon, who at the time was probably considered the first African-American millionaire in Atlanta. And his son was one of the first African-Americans admitted to West Point. A lot was going on. And A.D. Williams was part of that community who believed that the African had a place in America, that he should not be pulled up by his bootstraps, that they had a mind, not just men, but women. Because A.D. Williams believed in the duality, that men were not dominant, but he did believe that women had the ability to be significant, not just housewives, but teachers and leaders within the community. What is not known about A.D. Williams is this: A.D. Williams led a boycott against the trolley system in Atlanta, Georgia. And why did he do that? Because he did not feel that African Americans should sit in the back of anything. So he got some of the clergy together, and they had a boycott, an early boycott around 1908, 1909, to force Atlanta to develop seating arrangements where African Americans and folk who weren't African American, white folk, could sit anywhere they wanted to sit on the trolley. And as I told you earlier, $3,500 is a lot of money to develop, to buy a house in 1909. Getting back to Martin King's birth. Martin King's original name was Michael Luther King Jr. His father, of course, his name was Martin Luther King Sr. Martin Luther King Sr. was named after two uncles who his father loved, his father cherished, and in 1931, A.D. Williams died of a massive heart attack at 501 Auburn Avenue. And the church decided to vote in Michael Luther King Sr. as its pastor. In 1934, the Baptist community had a world convention in Europe. And the church afforded Daddy King, as he was affectionately known, to go there, and he went to Germany and visited several places that he found important. Many people think that Michael King may have been named by his mother, who believed in the Archangel Michael. But the truth of the matter is this: when Daddy King went to Germany, he had an opportunity to read and understand who Martin Luther was. Martin Luther, as you all know, was a great reformer who typed 95 theses on a church in Wittenberg to say that he did not believe in indulgence. He did not believe that the church should sell forgiveness. He believed that forgiveness is earned through one's confession of faith, through one's belief in God, through one belief in, as we Christians believe, in the deity of Jesus. So when Michael King Sr. came back home, he decided that he would be known as Martin Luther Jr. So it is believed at that time that Martin Luther King Sr. took his son's birth certificate and with nice signature wrote in Martin Luther Jr. And that's how Martin King got his name. He did not get it. His name was not, he was not named as the German reformer, but technically his daddy was. So at the age of 5 years old, Michael became Martin. That's how Martin King got his name. All of his life, Martin was either called Michael or ML. If you read the story in Daddy King's book, it tells you all the story of why he felt the need to name his son Martin. If you talk to his sister, Miss Christine Farris, who is still living, she's about 95 years old, she still lives in Atlanta. She says that nobody called him Martin from childhood. Nobody called him Martin Luther. Everybody called him either ML or Michael. And some of Martin's dearest friends, the people who he met, will tell you, we called him Mike. So he was known as Mike King. Michael, or what we know as Martin, was an avid student. He was a kid who liked to get in trouble. He did strange things. He teased his sister. He would have this idea that he would jump down the stairs and act as if he was like he was not moving or dead, and it would cause his sister great grief. Michael loved baseball. He loved sports. He was very good as a football player. But in Atlanta, Morehouse College had just hired a gentleman by the name of, wonderful fella, Benjamin Elijah Mays. Benjamin Elijah Mays at one time had been the president of the seminary at Howard University, or in their seminary. And they hired who they called Buck Benny, of Benjamin Elijah Mays to become the president of Morehouse College. And Morehouse College, as like any Black college during that time, did not have a lot of students. They were looking to develop more men, so they decided to start a program, an early entrance program, that Martin King was able to pass the test. And at the age of 15, Martin King was admitted to Morehouse College. I've met a few of Martin's classmates. There was a pastor of the A&B Zion Church who said that he was a jokester. He loved to dance, which went against the chagrin of his father, because his daddy was a conservative Black Baptist there in the South. For some strange reason, in the mid-1930s up until around the 1970s, Baptists were very conservative. Some of us still are. And dancing was unheard of. They thought it was ungodly, it was sinful, but Martin King didn't care what his father thought. And like every kid at his age, he loved to dance, he went to parties, and he had a good time. It is known, according to the record, that Martin King was a regular student. He was insightful. He was a good speaker. He loved the girls at Spelman College. I don't blame him, but he enjoyed having a good time. While a student at Morehouse College, he had a very strong relationship with Benjamin Elijah Mays. Benjamin Elijah Mays was a preacher. He wanted a profound graduate of Bates College, but Benjamin Elijah Mays was not the Black Baptist preacher that his daddy was. His father was what we call a hooping preacher. He loved to get excited. He loved to sweat. He loved to talk about hell and brimstone, but not Benjamin Mays. Benjamin Mays had an attitude of, how do I say this? Benjamin, he was classy. He believed in the pronunciation of words. He loved reading. Martin King said that Benjamin Mays was his father, his academic father, because he gave him insights on how the ministry could help change America, how it could lead African Americans to have a better existence in the world. Martin had seen with his father the power of leadership. Daddy King was part of a group of men, the pastor of the Wheat Street Baptist Church, the Bethel A&B Church. And if you ever ride in Atlanta, Georgia, and you ride at night on 85-75, if you look to your right, as you're going on your way to Alabama or Montgomery, you'll see a sign that says Jesus Saves. That sign was put up around 1952 by the congregants of the Bethel Church to let folk know this is what we believe in. Martin King would go to chapel and hear Benjamin Mays' messages. And one of the messages that every Morehouse man remembers is a poem that goes like this: I've only got a minute, 60 seconds in it, forced upon me, didn't choose it, can't abuse it, but it's up to me to use it, a tiny little minute, and in that minute lies eternity. Every graduate of Morehouse College, every graduate of Morehouse School of Religion knows that poem by heart. And if you ask them who wrote it, they'll tell you Benjamin Elijah Mays. But Benjamin Mays will tell you if he was alive today, he didn't write it, but he remembered it. And the reason he remembered it because he said it was the urgency of Africans. It was the urgency of every Black person to not sit down and wait for opportunities to come to you, but for you to go to it and make a difference in the world. And Martin King's father was that kind of guy. Even though he was not academic savvy as Benjamin Mays, although Martin's father was not the kind of guy that would write a paper on Hegel or Paul Tillich as Martin did, Daddy King was a fighter. He was one of the individuals that got Black teachers in Atlanta. Matter of fact, it was him that was able to get his own daughter, who was a graduate of Spelman College and a graduate of Columbia University here in New York, to get her first teaching job. He did not want his daughter to go to school in New York and become a teacher there because they offered her a job. He did not want his daughter to have a job in Detroit or Chicago or anywhere else. He felt he needed his daughter at home. So he fixed it and argued and demanded that his daughter be hired as a school teacher in Atlanta, Georgia. And Miss Farris, as we know her, was a school teacher in Atlanta, Georgia, until she got a job at Spelman College, which is her alma mater. Martin King, at the age of 19, decided, after listening to Benjamin Mays, after sneaking out of his father's church and walking down the street to listen to William Howard's Board of Sermon, he decided himself to go into the ministry, because Martin was developing an attitude that God was personal, that he believed that God was not abstract, that God had a personality, that God cared. And Martin says jokingly that he believed that if we have a sense of laughter, God must have a sense of laughter. And God must care so much about the humankind that he intervenes, she intervenes on behalf of all of us, despite how others may see God, male or female. And at the age of 19, Martin King gave what is known in the Baptist tradition as the initial sermon. And keep in mind that whenever a young man or young woman goes into the ministry, it was never done in the sanctuary. It was always done in the basement. And when Daddy King announced that Martin King was going to the ministry, they started in the basement, but they had to go to the sanctuary because people were coming from all over the neighborhood to find out how could this hard-headed boy who loved joking, who loved dancing, actually go into the ministry. And at the age of 19, in his senior year, Martin King gave his first sermon in the community. And Daddy King said on that night, he thanked God that his son would follow him into the ministry. And Daddy King had great plans for Martin, that he wanted Martin to go to seminary. And when he finished seminary, that he would come back to Atlanta and become his co-pastor, that he would preach on the second and fourth Sunday. His son would preach on the first and third Sunday. And he had great plans. However, Martin had other ideas. Martin decided to go to Crozier, there in Pennsylvania, to get an education and to become the kind of preacher, not like his daddy, but more like Benjamin Mays. Martin King believed that there's a social gospel, that the clergy must understand metaphysically that although we live in an abstract world, that God has a plan for us based on our understanding of our surroundings. And Martin King understood, although he came from a well-to-do community, although he grew up seeing great individuals, knowing that down the block, he heard Duke Ellington at the Royal Peacock. Although down the block, he heard people such as a young and vibrant Ray Charles, and saw all these wonderful, brilliant minds. King decided that he was going to use the ministry not just about preaching about who God is, but what God could do based on God's personality and God's input and understanding that God cares about humanity. So he goes to seminary and he's introduced to a brilliant mind by the name of Paul Tilley. And Paul Tilley was a German existentialist who believed he wrote a book called To Be. And in the book it said that once we get past the abstract, once we get past that God is more than just some mystical being, God has an interest in us. We as intimate beings ought to have an interest in God and have this relationship where God can invest in us and we can invest in God and somehow or another develop a plan to make changes in our world. And Martin King learned from Paul Tillich and Hegel and all these other wonderful individuals that God had a plan. And even a guy named Buber, Martin Buber, the I and the thou, he understood that God had a plan to make a difference in who and what and how we can make a difference. And while there, Martin decided that if ministry was going to be successful for him, he couldn't just be one that preached on Sundays, but his message must be food for thought through the week. Martin King grew up in an environment where a guy named Mr. Dobbs, Lewis Dobbs, who had a daughter named Matilda. And Matilda had a nephew whom went to Morehouse also. He didn't do like Brother God, but he didn't become a Kappa. He became an Alpha man, praise God. And he became the first African-American mayor of Atlanta, Georgia, Maynard Jackson. Also, Mr. Dobbs pushed Atlanta to hire Black policemen. Because up until the 1940s, African Americans who were policemen could not arrest people who were not African American. But Dobbs pushed it, and he pushed it to the point where it didn't matter what color you were. If you were guilty, you were guilty. Also, Martin King also understood about Alonzo Herndon, who developed the Atlanta insurance company, whose son went on to go on to West Point. But he also understood there's not by the bootstraps that we pull up ourselves, but by our hands, we pull up each other. And Martin King thought that ministry, his job was to pull up individuals, because he believed in this concept of personality, that God had interests in humankind. He finishes at seminary cruiser, and he decides he gets a fellowship to go to Boston University. And when he gets there, he tells the professor, "This is my plan. I've already started on my PhD during the summer." He tells his professors, "This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do my paper on Paul Tilley, because Paul Tilley understands who I am. I'm going to talk about that God sees me not lost in the universe, and that justice and goodness is not lost with it. But because of my relationship with God and God's relationship with me, he removes the abstract and he becomes involved with me because he's invested in me. God's invested in me. And not only is God invested in me as male, but God's invested in me as woman, because God goes beyond the gender, and God sees me as a spirit that will make change. So he tells his professors, "This is what I'm going to do." And Martin struggles in his PhD program, because when Martin writes, he does not use any notes. He does not use where he gets his information from. His information, it comes from his head. He does not borrow from Paul Tilley. He does not borrow from Hegel. He doesn't borrow from Nietzsche. He doesn't borrow from anybody else. Matter of fact, Martin King does not borrow from any of the great theologians that he grew up, that he learned about in seminary. All of this comes from his thoughts, because he witnessed as a young boy. It doesn't matter what your status is, but what does matter is that you must be willing to move beyond the abstract and see God's investment in who I am personally. That my reality is not in what others say. My reality is based on possibility through God. So the first year he struggles. And while they're at a party, he meets Coretta Coretta Scott, who is 2 years older than he is. Not only is she 2 years older than he is, she's taller than he is. A lot of people don't understand this, but Coretta Scott was physically taller than Martin. And she said she didn't understand what this short man wanted to do with her. But Martin was a great talker. Some people said he had a gift for gab. And I believe that. He won her over and he got married. One of the strange things that people don't talk about with Martin King is this. Martin King finished his dissertation in 1954. He defended it in 1955, April of 1955, and was granted the PhD. However, Martin did not go to his graduation. He didn't walk across the stage like everybody else. And some people ask, well, why didn't he show up? Very simple. He didn't have the money, and something was more important than his degree. His wife was pregnant with their first daughter, Yolanda. So he decided to stay at his new church there in Montgomery, Alabama, in May of 1955. And May of 1955 was a strange time because a few months later, Martin King and a lot of other people in our country hear the story of a gentleman or a little boy by the name of Emmett Till, who's missing in Mississippi, who came from Chicago. And after spending 3 days in Mississippi, he's missing and is found tormented and face destroyed. And when his mother is asked, don't open the casket, she says, I'm going to keep it open so the world can see what my son looks like. And Jet Magazine printed the picture of Emmett Till. A distorted face. And according to some of Mamie Till's book written in 2012, she says that when they opened the casket, you could smell the remains of Emmett Till for 2 to 3 blocks. That's how horrendous they had done this child. And Martin writes later on in 1960 that the death of Emmett Till changed his life. Not only did it change change Martin King's life, but it changed the lives of a lot of African Americans, and it changed how Martin preached. It changed how Martin saw the world. And after the trial, where these two gentlemen were found not guilty, and then they gave the story to Look magazine, and Rosa Parks hears Mamie Till's story. 100 days later, she decides that she is going to have her own statement, and I'm not going to get up from my seat on this Montgomery bus in Montgomery, Alabama. And Martin King, along with his classmates there at Morehouse, even Benjamin Mays said this, that they believe that Emmett Till's death is really the beginning of the civil rights movement in America. Martin, throughout his life and his upbringing, believed that God had a personal interest in humankind. And humankind ought to have a personal interest in the divine presence or the divine. And Martin gave these wonderful sermons at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And people had never heard sermons like that. Martin challenged the society that he lived in by using Paul Tillich's ideas, who was still alive. He also took up an idea of non-violent resistance by Mahatma Gandhi. And Martin King understood that Gandhi had some issues. If you read some of his early writings, he admits that he understood that Mahatma Gandhi had his own personal issues. But he realized that his theology of not fighting back were the equivalent of what Martin said was the equivalent to what Jesus believed, turning the other cheek. And Martin's idea of turning the other cheek was not just standing still, but taking into consideration whether he learned from Benjamin Elijah Mays, who said, I've only got a minute, 60 seconds in it, forced upon me, didn't choose it, can't abuse it, but it's up to me to use it. A tiny little minute, but in that minute is eternity. And Martin also learned another poem called Invictus, out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole. I thank whatever God may be for my unconquerable soul. But at the end of that poem, it says these words: it matters not how straight the gate or how charged the punishment of the scroll. I am the master of my fate and the captain of my soul. And Martin understood those values because those same values helped another fighter of truth there in South Africa. So Martin, along with his best friend, a wonderful preacher out of Alabama, they together made a decision that Ralph Abernathy and Martin King would fight against injustice, and they would do it where it would be respectable. It is said that every night during the Montgomery movement, that they met at church, and they said thousands of people would come because they wanted to hear what Martin had to say. He was able to convince every African American in town not to ride the bus. And in December, after 300 some odd days, 362 days to be exact, African Americans were allowed to ride the bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Black folk sit wherever they wanted to sit. As Martin King's notoriety became more prevalent, in 1960, through his understanding of the theology of personhood, he fulfilled his father's hope by becoming the co-pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. And the deal was that Martin King would preach on the first and third, and his father would preach on the second and fourth. And his daddy always reminded him, you might be the co-pastor, but I'm the pastor. And that was always a joke. And it was said that you could not get a seat in Ebenezer, that they had to open up the downstairs, put speakers outside to hear this wonderful Morehouse man give sermons about personhood, to believe in the metaphysical idea that God is beyond abstract, that we need to understand what it means to be, what it means to be a conscious human being, despite the color, despite one's gender. And Martin King believed that gender was not binary nor non-binary, because he had a very good friend who was an open gay man, Bayard Rustin, who Martin King loved and trusted and believed. And it is said, even by Dr. King and David Garrow, who wrote proficiously about Dr. King, he said that they did everything they could to break up their friendship. But Bayard Rustin found ways to meet Martin. If he had to sneak to his house by sitting in the trunk of a car, if he had to meet Martin in some dark place, in some dark shack somewhere to just have a conversation, have a cup of coffee and smoke a cigarette. The two of them had such a wonderful relationship because Martin understood that our relationship with God was personal. It was not based on what society said or the abstract idea of what folk believed in God, but it was more about the personal relationship. And their friendship lasted up until Martin King's death. And I really believe that Dr. King did more than just change America. I believe that Dr. King changed the way theologians spoke or believed. I think that Dr. King understood the necessity. If you read Dr. King's book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, he talks about this idea of the world house. That was the last book that Martin King wrote. He talked about how it did not matter how you saw God from the perspective of a Jewish person or a Muslim person or a Christian person. God is still God. And until we learn to worship God as one, we will always be at odds with each other. And we are. Some of us, I can't say like Zoe and I, we love having fun. We eat food together. Zoe likes Chinese food more than I do, though. I'm gonna just throw it out for free. When we pray to God. Because we know that God is greater than the abstract. We understand that God has invested in us. And that God understands our value. And because we have value with God, God allows us to come together and see each other as we are. And the great thing about Zoe Bizak and myself, we are perfect in friendship. Not just because of how we make music, but how we see baseball. Zoe, like me, is a New York Mets fan. And there is only one baseball team in New York, and that is the New York Mets. Anything else outside of New York Mets is sheer rumor. And Martin King was a baseball fan. When the Atlanta Braves came to Atlanta from Milwaukee, he made it his business to always go to a baseball game. He made it his business for his children to see who Hank Aaron was, and who Willie Mays was, and the value of knowing that on a baseball field, we're all one. Even up to Martin King's death, even when Dr. King had an attitude that the Vietnam War was ungodly. And even though some of his friends, like William Raspberry, said that his view of the war was un-American, Martin's attitude was, when you kill people, he took St. Augustine's idea of death and said, you cannot kill people for the good of freedom, but you can die for the good of freedom. Freedom, death and freedom come by striving together. And one of the things that I'll leave with is this. Martin King believed in personhood so much that he said after he was stabbed by Miss Lizzo in New York, he said God's presence in his life made him realize that it's not how long you live, but how you live. And how Martin King lived has allowed him to live within all of us. And we're almost out of time. And I want to thank you for listening, because I do know that I could talk forever, but I do know the power of limits. So I want to thank you. I appreciate you letting me tell you what I know, but please develop the idea that we only do have a minute, and and time is limited, because in a minute there's only 60 seconds forced upon us. We didn't choose it, but it is up to us to use it. A tiny little minute. In that minute is eternity. take advantage of your time. Martin King took advantage of his 39 years. Do the same with yours. Thank you very much.
Reverend Everett, you are such an inspiration. I've never been more proud to call you my friend. So for anyone that wants to continue to be inspired by this amazing pastor here, you can, he's preaching online. You can check him out on Facebook, First Emmanuel Missionary Baptist Church of Christ in Central Nyack. You can go to Pastor Everett's Facebook page,
right?
Pastor Everett Newton. And you can hear him giving one amazing inspired sermon after another. For those of you who haven't had the privilege of hearing him sing, you're in for a treat. And you can follow our Peace Ensemble when COVID lightens up and we can do more concerts together. Can't wait. And I just, from the bottom of my heart, want to thank you. And I want to thank everybody who's joined us from near and far. Really, it's an honor to be here in this sacred community tonight. And Pastor Everett, cannot even thank you enough. Only blessings for you, for your community, for everyone here, for your families, for your communities, and anyone who would like to participate in anything we're doing here at Temple Israel of Catskill. You can join, go to our website, templeisraelofcatskill.org, or I post everything on my Facebook page, Zoe B. Zach. I do want to say that we're celebrating here in Catskill the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on February 17th at 5 o'clock. We meet here at the First Baptist Church, which is just down the street from us, with Reverend Turpin. And we're having it all outdoors this year. I know you know Reverend Turpin, and he's a friend of mine as well. One wonderful, powerful, amazing pastor.
Good guy.
Yeah.
Good guy.
And invite everyone to our Sabbath services, which are also on Facebook, and anything else we're doing, Torah studies. You're all welcome to everything. Thank you so much. It's truly an honor to be with all of you. Only blessings, everyone. Good night.
All right. Have a good evening.
Good night, everyone.
So long, Zoe.